people who work night shift have a higher risk of cardiometabolic and metabolic syndrome, in addition to abdominal obesity. It's well documented. They have like a 3 times risk compared to the general population. It has to do with the metabolic stress and the hormonal imbalances that happen when people do shift work.
Everyone in healthcare has a story that they never forget. Some are beautiful, some are difficult, most are never told. This is the space and place where folks in healthcare talk about the moments that change them. Welcome to HUMED, where we talk about the emotional, moral, and human realities of medicine. I'm Dr. David Spiro. Thank you for being here. I'm incredibly delighted and excited to have Dr. Oraedu, who is a academic hospitalist and nocturnist. She's based in Stamford, Connecticut, not far from New Haven, where I lived for a little bit, and is now 17 years of post-residency experience, or PGY20, as we might say, practicing night shift medicine. She continues to serve as a per diem nocturnist. She's board certified in internal medicine. She earned her medical degree from the University of Nigeria and completed her residency at SUNY Downstate, which is in Brooklyn, New York, where my dad hails from. And I grew up not far from that on Long Island. She's the founder of Yale Aura, a lifestyle and obesity coaching platform focused on improving the health and metabolic well-being of night shift workers. Dr. Chi regularly contributes media content on night shift wellness, circadian health, and sustainable behavior change. She's also the co-author of Thriving After Burnout and the former radio host of the Night Shift Lifestyle Show with Dr. Yale Aura. Her work uniquely bridges the science and lived experience of night shift medicine, translating evidence-based insights into storytelling and strategic wellness solutions that drive lasting transformation for shift workers. And I'm incredibly delighted to have you on the HUMED show.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, David. Oh my goodness. That introduction is just amazing. I think I actually need it. I need to like have it because it's like a summary of everything that I've done, and I'm so happy to be here. Happy that you invited me to your show.
Yeah. And the world of social media is crazy, and how we found each other, I think, on Threads. And I've been fascinated by your story. And, I'm an emergency medicine physician where we work night shifts very close, and we work very closely with our pediatric hospitalist colleagues. So I would love to hear a little bit about your story and what you'd like to share with us today.
So, I mean, if you know me, Chielo, most people, I'm very social. I'm somebody who is more of a daytime. I mean, I like to be seen. I just never really thought I was gonna, be doing anything around night shift. But I mean, the story around it is, I mean, I like to call it the season and the reason for night shift. And when I was completing residency, first of all, I mean, I'll just backtrack a little bit, just a little about myself and how I ended up here. We had twins. When I was about to start residency, I had twin boys. And I remember the OBGYN, he told me, Chi and Okay, my husband's name is Okay. Listen, you guys are having twins. You're going to need a lot of money to raise them in America. I'm like, wow. So he's like, this is like an eye opener. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to both work and raise your kids. So fast forward, I started residency 4 months after I had twins. 4 months.
Wow.
In Brooklyn. It was rough. But, towards the end of my residency, one of my girlfriends, she just mentioned to me, she said she's going to work nights for like 2 years, and then she'll go do her fellowship in POMCRIT, pulmonary and critical care. So that was when the whole light bulb went on. I said, oh, night shift. I never really thought about it. I have kids, and, I've been doing residency for 3 years. I've hardly been around. Maybe this could kind of work for us. I could be around to raise the kids, and then I could go do my fellowship in hematology oncology, because that has always been my, my passion and all that. But that didn't happen. It didn't happen. So my reason and my season for night shift became that as a mother who with young kids, I needed to work, and as a mom, you're always trying to find that work life balance. So that was my reason, and it was my season as a working mom to raise my children, and my husband and I could work at the same time. So, but as I continued to work night shift, I just began to notice the rhythm and people, the similarities with people there who were also working nights at the same time, especially women, and their stories and if I kind of the deeper I go in, some people they had a reason that had to do with caring for their children, young, dependent kids, and then their parents, their aging parents. So now they have like, like a sandwich generation where you're raising children and you're taking care of parents. So they continue to work night shift. So I'm like, wow, that these people are working nights for the best reasons. Because as doctors, people always tell you don't work at night. We have a lot of research around night shift and I know there's a higher risk of, cardiometabolic, disease and all that. But I kept thinking, why can't we find the commonality, or why can't we find evidence-based medicine that could help these people to minimize, not totally eliminate, but to minimize so that we can meet people where they are? Because a lot of people were doing this while going to school. I mean, I've met a lot of even physicians who tell you that during undergrad, they went to night school. They went to school, I go to medical school. And so there's a lot of usefulness to people who work at night. So when my story started to evolve mostly around childcare, and then the person I became because I work at night and the stories you hear when you take care of patients when they are most vulnerable. Because I don't really think people come to the hospital at night because they just want to come see doctors. I think that something may have happened and the patient was totally so scared, didn't know what was going on, and called 911. I think I need to see a doctor now. So the level of vulnerability that I see as a night nocturnist and the clinical skills I have developed, as a result of being a solo nocturnist, when I started working in the hospital, and then moving on to working with residents and having to offer, consultation to like subspecialists as the only doctor in the hospital. Dr. Oraedu, could you just look at this EKG? People just come to you with as the as the in-house medical attendant,
Sure.
like the house physician, like Dr. House. That's what I tell people. I'm Dr. House. Just the in-house physician. So people come to you and it helps you with your knowledge, it helps you with your confidence, the resilience. It kind of pushes you to the limit of what you can offer. But I think the downside of it is that you're still working against the circadian rhythm. So
Right. So I was hoping for the audience you could explain because you've used some words, and if there may be some early learners that are listening to the show. So you finished a residency in internal medicine, and then after that residency, you took a job as a hospitalist, and then a hospitalist that worked overnight. Correct? That's what you mean by a nocturnist. And could you explain to the audience what a hospitalist does? And can you also explain what specific hours you worked? What's considered nocturnist hours at your hospital?
so pretty much a hospitalist is it's a subspecialty within internal medicine. Some people don't see it like, but that's really what it is. It's
Because
a
in pediatrics now, we actually have, it's not boarded yet, but it's like a 1 or 2 year fellowship that more pediatricians are doing, and it's a career now, and it's definitely a subspecialty in pediatrics for sure.
internal medicine. I think that some programs do offer a fellowship training,
Hmm.
especially
Hmm.
well, but I guess not trained in internal medicine. But but in a nutshell, a hospitalist is acute care physician. Somebody who works in the hospital setting. We don't have private offices, but we work in the hospital setting, taking care of patients who are admitted. And the range of work we do, we some of us cover the intensive care unit, like the ICU. So we take care of patients who are critically ill, and some of us, we support subspecialists when they need consults or they need us to like co-manage, some of their patients. And then we work closely with the nurses. We're kind of the backbone of the hospital to some extent, because we're always in house. We coordinate, multidisciplinary, management of patients with nurses, case managers, with administration, with the families. We work closely with the families. So we're involved in the day-to-day management of every patient who is admitted in the hospital setting. And some of us also work in other, like, like nursing homes, like, the, subacute care settings too. But for the most part, I worked in the hospital setting. Mostly it was a suburban setting. The hospital where I worked, so it wasn't like an inner city hospital. It was suburb, because I moved from New York to Connecticut. I live in Connecticut now to do the job, and part of my description, I had to teach residents. So some of us are
Sure.
also, academic. We participate in
And
training.
what hours do you work? When you define yourself as a nocturnist, what does that actually mean to you or within the context of internal medicine?
So my hours were 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So like 12 hours overnight in house, because you know that, nowadays the whole hospitalist and nocturnist workflow has really changed a lot. And that's
Mhm.
part of the reason, when I talk about, hospitals kind of modifying the work schedule to accommodate more people, and to also align with, the natural rhythm of the body, because 12 hours could be a long shift. But I do 8 p to 8 a. But some people also do telenocturnists, where you are remote. You're not in the hospital in-house, but they're also like covering from a remote location. So, medicine is really evolving so that,
Hmm.
patients can, especially people, hospitals in rural or very remote areas, they can have access to 24/7 coverage. So that's an area of medicine I'm really very interested in.
So I have a question about that. So if you're taking, responsible overnight for patients in the hospital and also probably admissions, how would you do that and how could you examine patients remotely?
So
If you're doing it if you're, doing telehealth like that.
So the whole idea of telehealth is, low acuity patients, because we have patients, you work in the OR, in the ED, who get admitted, but it's, maybe there's some social issues or it's a readmission. It's a low acuity admission. So hospitals that use this system, that subscribe to like a telenocturnist, I mean, you know that if you look at the healthcare system, especially admission cycle, in a 24-hour cycle, that the busiest time in the hospital is usually from like around 1 p.m. I mean, in the emergency room, the busiest time is from around 1 p.m. till maybe 11 p.m. There's an uptick in people who come to the hospital, who come to the emergency room. So what usually happens is that, as a nocturnist, when you come in at 8, if the daytime hospitalists are overwhelmed with admissions, discharges, returning phone calls for families, and other logistics, the night person gets slammed. When you come in at night, you may have like 6, 7 patients still waiting to be seen. And we know that in the emergency room setting, patients don't get the best care. They don't get their medications. They don't, so many things get missed. So you want to get a patient through the throughput. Get them admitted so they get it bad. So what some hospitals do is that they have a window whereby the in-house hospitalist is kind of offloaded. You just don't deal with calls from the upstairs. The cross coverage, because we also take care of admitted patients in the hospital, people that are already, and if they have
Sure.
needs. Yeah. So you offload the in-house doctor with cross coverage calls and low acuity admissions, where somebody now comes to, you know, fully examine the patient, or if they have like a telehealth, the medical equipment, like, like people who do like, teleneurology, they have equipment that they use to examine patients. So some hospitals have evolved to that point where there's a remote nocturnist who supports the in-house nocturnist. Yeah.
I see. So you getting back to your story, you had a calculus to as a young mom, 4-month-old, you had young twin boys, and you made it a calculated decision to do nocturnist work as a young mom. What about that schedule was attractive to you? Because when I think about nocturnist work, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be off at 8 in the morning. I'm going to not going to feel great. What was attractive to you as a young mom, or for other young moms out there that are thinking about doing evening work?
So, I mean, like I said, the most attractive thing was that I could be around, in the morning time when I get home from work. I could, spend some time with my kids, and then, drop them off at, daycare. Then my husband will be the one to pick them up later in the evening. And, and also that I could, we just didn't need to depend on somebody to watch the kids all the
I
time.
see. I see.
That total dependence, when both of you have, both couples have the same schedule. I mean, I have to be at work. My husband was actually working in New York, so he had to be in the city. We just didn't want to depend on somebody else to raise our children. So we wanted to work out a schedule where both of us could work. And that's why it was extremely so hard. I'm not gonna say it was easy, right? It was draining, and that was why I started looking for answers. Who are the people out there who work at night and have the same struggle? And what are the studies out there that show how people can minimize the risk? And how can I get even my personal physician to really understand that this is a reason and a season, that this is not a permanent situation, and that I need support. I need you to give me like a blueprint, just give me like a roadmap. Just work with me. And that's why I'm so happy that now a lot of people have options, for weight loss across, for medical weight loss. And so many people who work nights have gotten on, started to like seek help, because people who work night shift have a higher risk of cardiometabolic and metabolic syndrome, in addition to abdominal obesity. It's well documented. They have like a 3 times risk compared to the general population. And we know that it has to do with the stress. It has to do with the metabolic stress, and the hormonal imbalances that happen when people do shift work. And
I want to talk about that for a second, because there's also literature in emergency medicine that those workers that work nocturnist work in emergency medicine have a 30 to 40% increase in all cause mortality. In other words, you're 30 to 40% more likely to die early if you long term are doing shift work. And you had just thrown out a couple things. I just want to dissect that for a second because it's interesting. You had talked about truncal obesity. You talked about cardiometabolic syndrome, which is metabolic syndrome's recently been, maybe when you were in medical school, it was just being figured out. The term didn't exist when I was in medical school. I think I'm a little older than you. The idea that when you gain weight, your body can become dysregulated, and bad things start to happen. Type 2 diabetes, as an example. And so, what about uh, working overnights? What about nocturnist work based upon your experience? You're an author. You wrote about this. You're a coach about this. What is the reason? Is it because there are Twinkies all over the place and Oreo cookies at night? But seriously, like, why do people gain weight at night? Because I don't know what it's like at Stamford, Connecticut, but every ER I've worked at, there's bad food all over the place. There's bad food in the cafeteria. There's bad food sitting in the nurses area. It's
That's why.
just totally junk, bad food, and it exists 24/7. But what is it about the evening that increases that cardiovascular metabolic risk that you talked about?
So, I mean, first of all, we have to go back to the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm, that is the biological clock. It's just how your body is supposed to function.
When we wake up, when we go to sleep.
Wake up when you go to sleep, your cortisol rises in the morning,
Mhm.
and so that you can, your fight and flight, you can go about your regular day, awake and able to function. And then once the sun sets and evening comes, the cortisol starts going down and your melatonin normally starts rising. And that's the normal cycle. But when you work at night, you're trying to go to work against the grain because you're going in when melatonin is rising and is likely going to peak around 2 a.m., 2, 3 a.m., which corresponds with deep sleep. In normal people, that's when you're like the deepest sleep. But for somebody who works at night, you're setting out like when I leave at 8 p.m., we have a schedule because my family, my children, they understand my schedule. So I have my cup of coffee when I'm heading out at 7. And by the time I get to work at 8, it started kicking in. So now you're taking a coffee and everything because you're trying to like stay awake. You're trying to increase your level of alertness at a time that melatonin is being secreted, and it's going to hit the highest point secretion at about 2 a.m. and you want to be awake at that time. So your body is totally out of sync with your normal biology. That is just the thing about night shift. It's kind of swimming against the grain and just swimming upstream against a very high current. So what the studies are showing now is that there's something called chrononutrition. There's better ways to eat for your circadian rhythm. Because the human body is not programmed for you to eat all the time, right? It's all part of this, the hormonal secretion, your leptin, your ghrelin, all those hormones are disrupted in some people who work nights and who just don't get enough sleep deprivation, chronic sleep deprivation. Because you find out that if you talk to a night shift worker, the first thing they're going to tell you, complain about is sleep. I don't get enough sleep. They're like, actually, studies have shown that compared to people who work day shift, the night shift workers are almost like 4 hours sleep deprived compared to their day shift counterparts
On a daily basis.
on a daily basis. On the on,
Wow.
on the days that I mean on the nights that they work, particularly. So it's cumulative over time. So and we know that when people don't sleep enough, it's usually more difficult to control their appetite. So now your leptin is so low, your ghrelin is so high, you're always eating and you're craving the bad food. You're craving the high carb, high fat, all the snacks that we have in the vending machine. And
Which are 99% processed foods,
exactly
ultra processed foods.
food. And the timing sometimes, when you want to get healthy food at night, it's not available. So you get what you can. And so these are all the confounding, issues that contribute to night shift obesity. So it's not just motivation. It's the biology. And it's not that your body is broken. It's just that your biology is not suited for the shift that you have. So now you have to work your way backwards and align. Start to eat for your biology. Start to eat for the schedule that you have. Yeah.
So what do you do? You are a coach now, and so you're working with, I'm assuming, healthcare folks in the healthcare space that are nocturnists. What is your philosophy as a coach? How do you approach coaching around nocturnist lifestyle? What advice can you give folks who are working in the nocturnist world? I'm very curious about the coaching piece. So can you share a little bit about that?
So, I like to look at a lot of studies. I've just been fascinated about not just, circadian health, but just night shift, the kind of people who work night shift, the level of resilience that they have.
Mm.
And I mean, what is the intersection between resilience and burnout? Are people just trying to forge ahead? Because you hear all the time that resilience without replenishment, leads to depletion. If you just keep pushing that, oh my God, I'm gonna get over it. I have grit. Then you're gonna wake up one day and you're totally depleted. Totally. And then it leads to resentment now. So within my coaching program, because night shift workers have a shared suffering. That's one of the words that gets thrown around. The kind of a shared suffering when people work at night, and that's why I look at it from a season and a reason. You just have to know why you do it, so you can find joy around it. Right? You do it for your children. My children are well adjusted, and I can tell you that perhaps I don't do it as much as I used to before because I just know that it's not the best for me, and I have a marriage, I have a husband, I'm in a relationship, and so you have to just look at it from that reason and season perspective. And
Well,
so
also, the other piece is that as we get older, it becomes more and more difficult. Is that fair?
absolutely,
Yeah.
it's hard to, like, once it hits 2 3 a.m. your body just shuts down.
Yeah.
It's harder. Most people will tell you that the older you get. I mean, I started doing it when I was, I don't know, I mean, I'm 50 now, so I was like, if I how I gotta do the math. I was like 33 or so when I started doing it. So I'm 50 now, and I just kind of do less of it, but it gives me a clarity of thought. And I just don't want to get into the whole chronotypes because I think that's a very fascinating part of people who do night shift, the night owls and the morning larks. And is everybody who works at night a night owl? Yeah, and then the sleep genes. It's fascinating. It is. And but within the coaching program, first of all, is to identify people who work nights when you feel like your metabolism is peak performance. Some people, I find out that I do better later on in the day. I could never do a job where I have to show up 8 a.m. in the morning. It just, I,
Hmm.
yeah, it's fascinating, but that's just me. Yeah, I just like to start my day pretty later on, 10, 11 a.m. I will be very much awake, but earlier than that, it's a problem. So you first of all identify those people, and then you teach them a better way to eat. Better way to eat. Eat for your cycle because we know that eating late at night, you know, puts you at a higher risk for whether it's pre-diabetes, the whole conversation about insulin resistance, and we know that your metabolism is not built for 24/7 eating. So how can people that work night, how can they eat better? More protein, it promotes satiety, right? Less carbs, eat before a certain time of the night, you know, increase exercise. And then we talk about, when you talk about exercise for somebody who works nights, especially for the period that you work at night, it's just important to know that intense exercise increases your cortisol. You just don't want that. As a matter of fact, for night shift workers, it's recommended that you do like short bursts of physical activity because
Hmm.
you need to be able to sleep at the end of your shift. So when you're kind of the gym kind of person who works out like intensely, it could impact your ability to sleep, after your night shift. So it's just a way of getting people and kind of supporting and teaching them a better way that I can support their current lifestyle. It doesn't mean that the risk is totally eliminated, but it just means that I see you. I know that you're doing this for the best reasons, but perhaps this is not working out for you. You're not getting enough sleep. You're gaining too much weight. It's affecting your relationships. I read that night shift workers have a high risk of divorce. That's not surprising. I think people can understand that when you work nights, it affects your intimate partner relationships. It affects your social life to a certain, and at some point you may start, it affects your mood. The Now we know about the relationship between sleep, and cognitive decline later in life. So there's so many things people need to know, but I don't think that we've we've gotten to a point where we could totally discourage people, everybody from working at night. I mean, the policy part of it is more like, can people work nights for shorter hours? Is that possible? Can we have like resources within the workspace that help people to kind of people to manage the difficulty of the job. I mean, some places people don't really have a respite area after working at night. You finish your night shift, then you have to drive home, and you're totally exhausted. And we know that the relationship between driving while fatigued and versus driving under the influence of alcohol, it's the same level of cognitive and physical impairments, kind of.
Yeah.
So these are like little ways that night shift workers could be supported, because I think we created night shift, we in terms of globalization and commercialization and maybe electricity, perhaps. Before electricity, nothing happened at night. So we created all that, and we can find ways to mitigate and minimize the health risk. And I think there was a study that just came out. I think it was published on the journal of I kind of it will come to me. It's on the chronotypes. It's chronotypes and life's essential eight. And they actually looked at night shift workers, looked at night owls, and then talked about targeted interventions that could help to minimize the risk. By identifying people and perhaps helping them to navigate, working non-standard hours. So that's what I do, and I like to kind of you know also ask people about like a questionnaire, no PHI, just how are you coping? Is it working for you? How can your job support you? Like the night, I mean, I'm doing like a night shift study, and when just looking at the data on that, you just see that people just want change. They want things to improve because there are people who function best at night. Perhaps maybe 20% of the population, they actually may have a night owl chronotype, and they do their best work at night. So maybe perhaps there are ways that we could kind of meet them and help them mitigate this risk.
So take me through what you've learned around when to sleep. So you work overnight, you start at 8 p.m., you have your coffee, um, you're eating better. Maybe I see that I do myself, and I try to encourage others to in the emergency department to bring their own food, to bring your own food that you've cooked and you're going to eat because you know what's going into your body. Um, but I'm curious, when does someone eat at night? When's the best time to eat at night? And then when is the best time to sleep? And when is the best time to work out? Do you work out when you get up in the morning? When you get up after uh, sleeping a night shift? When is the best time to exercise?
So that's part of the thing about night shift, and that's why it's kind of personalized. Because when you say night shift, a lot of people have different levels of physicality at their job, right? So as a physician, I know my workflow. I mean, the nurses have their own workflow. So my typical, just to put you through what my typical schedule will look like. So I finish my shift, and 8 o'clock, I'm heading out of the hospital, and then I usually wear my blue light, blocking, my sunglasses, because I'm trying to get my system to just know that I need to sleep when I get home. And I have like a 40-minute drive home. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, I know. I mean, I was living right 10 minutes from my job, and then we moved further north because I was going to change jobs, and it didn't happen. So And that's part of what I tell people. You just have to know when you're tired. I mean, there've been days that at the end of my shift, I go to the call room and I take a nap. I just take a nap, and sometimes I actually do take a shower even just to make sure that I'm fully awake. You just have to let your body and know when you're tired. But on a normal day that I'm able to drive home, when I get home, I don't jump right into bed because I know that like we just had like the spring forward. We just so there's so much sunlight. This is the most difficult time for people who work at night. It is extremely so hard to sleep when there's so much sunlight. So you have to get
Mm,
your room ready. You have to have the dark curtains. You just have to make the room to be at the right temperature. I keep my room at 68 degrees. That's my Fahrenheit. It has to be a little bit, not too hot, not too cold. 68 is good for me. And when I get home, I have a light breakfast. I don't eat heavy because I'm still trying to align with a normal person's rhythm.
sure.
So my breakfast and it's high protein. I am very. I tell people that you gotta just focus on the protein. It keeps you fuller, satiety, and also it's kind of it helps you kind of maintain, not really that you don't, I mean, you don't overdo it, you have to calculate it based on your needs, your body's needs and all that. But at least, if you're trying to get at my age at 50, I'm trying to maintain my lean muscle. So I am very big with protein. So I have a
So when you say protein, do you mean eggs? What?
Yeah, I'm eggs and low fat yogurt. Those are
Mm-hmm,
those
mm-hmm.
those are my two big ones for breakfast. Yeah, very low on carbs. I like to have my cup of tea, decaf tea, and then I shower, then I go sleep. I work out before I go to work. So I do wake up a little earlier and do my workout. Nothing too intense. Nothing too intense. I mean, I do dance. Sometimes I work on my elliptical for like 30 minutes. It just kind of sets my body into kind of rejuvenates. It just
It awakens. It awakens, right? Because you're producing cortisol.
it awakens me, but at the same time, it just gets my body into a kind of rhythm in
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
readiness. I'm gonna go to work.
mm-hmm.
And and I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm just trying to stay healthy. It's because the workout for weight loss is totally different. I don't encourage. I mean, for people that I work with in my night shift program, the physical activity that I encourage them, it's not for you to like lose so much weight. It's just for you to maintain fitness. Because I look at a lot of studies, especially in nurses, that compared day shift nurses versus night shift nurses. And the studies show that night shift nurses were actually more sedentary compared to day shift nurses. Because day shift nurses, they have to deal with the families, they go to the pharmacy. There's a lot of back and forth interaction between the patients, their family, and men, which doesn't happen at night.
Mm-hmm.
So now you see that if you work at night, I mean, this was in nurses, it wasn't really done on hospitalists. But I just tell people who work with me, you need to have um, a wearable technology. You have to monitor your level of activity, right? I mean, I see you have an Aura ring. I have one too. Yeah, yeah, I have one too. Actually, I'm actually charging it. Yeah, so you have to have, some wearable technology. You have to measure your food. I know people don't like to hear that, but when you're kind of new to weight loss, it's important that you really know measurements because you may think that, oh yeah, I can figure it out visually, but it's a lifestyle. It's
Sure.
a lifestyle, and for everything, it's you have to learn it. So there's some kind of 5 items that I encourage people, working with me. Wearable technology. You have to measure your food. You have to have a food scale. You have to have a water bottle. I encourage a lot of hydration at night because I think hydration helps you to curb your appetite. It helps you curb your appetite, especially even day shift or night shift, but especially at night because you're trying to work against your metabolism that is telling you that it's time to sleep. And there you go.
Having a water bottle. It's very simple, but having your own water bottle, in my opinion, is I carry this to work, and sometimes I'll have tea in it, like
Yeah.
decaf tea, but, I think water bottles are essential. So, getting back to the exercise, you think that if you're working night shifts for you, I know everyone has a different chronotype and everyone is their own person, but it feels like for you, exercise before the shift in the late afternoon, early evening is a good thing, and then having a cup of coffee.
Yeah, yeah, exercise. I just have to exercise every day. I have to. There has to be some
Mm,
movement just besides what happens at work. Because sometimes I have this. Okay, I want to get like certain number of steps a day, and I mean, a few times I just like to like pay attention to. I'm not gonna say that I use myself as a study sample, but how many steps do I get at work? I just okay. Once I walk into the hospital, I kind of pay attention. Then I say, oh my God, all this time at the hospital, I didn't even get up to 3,000 steps. And if I want to get 7,000 a day, then I have to work out. So it's just a way to just tell yourself that you have to do more. That work because I mean, people that work at night compared to day shift, we don't really do that much working. Because even as a nocturnist, I could tell myself on a night that is not too busy, for 2 hours I haven't moved from. I'm just like writing my notes for 2 hours. I'm like, wow, this is not good. Then I have to get up and try to stretch because there's minimal stimulation. I mean, ER is different because it's always busy, but it slows down at some point. But for me, as somebody that works nights, and my workflow, especially on a night that is not too busy, I find out that if I have to intentionally, in addition to working around in the hospital, I have to work out when I get home to maintain the level of fitness, physical fitness
mm,
that I desire. But and that is what is kind of fascinating about night shift. It's so individualized based on physical. Like I said, I mean, people that work if you work at Walmart at night or you work at Amazon or wherever, it's a different workflow. You know, so you put in so much time in the warehouse compared to if you're a physician working at night, compared to if you're a truck driver at night, or if you're an air traffic controller who's also doing shift work. So it just tells you that there's still so much that needs to be done to kind of streamline how can we help subsets of shift workers? Because I mean, shift work in the US, it's about, I mean, some studies put it at 18 million, some put it at like up to 25 million people who do shift work in this country. And sometimes it's like 1 in 4 people work shift work, which is 25% of the workforce. So it's a fair amount, a good number of people who perhaps need help and feel unseen and perhaps unheard, sometimes unappreciated, or maybe misunderstood. Because, and I'll just tell you that I met somebody who was on the verge of dropping out from school because she was trying to get an education, and but at the same time she just didn't know how to navigate raising kids and having to go to school in the morning. So she was having such a hard time, and I told her like, why don't you meet with your academic advisor and see if there's a way that she could transition you to like evening school. So whereby you get your kids ready in the morning, when they get back from school, start homework, and your husband is home, you go to school. You can get your education in such a way because education is, and that's why when I hear about people who work nights while getting their education, I just have this instant connection with them because I am a product of education, right? I am a product of education. My parents are both highly educated, but coming from Nigeria, my paternal grandfather had to give up, the money he would have used to become like a big chief in the whole town. He used it to send my father to high school.
mm.
So it really does resonate with me when I see people who are trying to find a balance, well, so that they can go to school. So I mean, this young lady, I just told her, just see if you can do it in the evening so that you can raise your children and your husband can help while you go to school. And that was exactly what she did. And interesting thing was that she reached out to me. She said, Dr. Oraedu, I just want to share this with you. I went from making $12,000 to like 125,000 because you encouraged me to go to school.
Mm, mm. That's wonderful.
It's
So,
encouraging.
so what is your thought? And I'm just curious in the hospitalist world, in emergency medicine, at least peds ER, many of us now work 8-hour shifts. And a while back when I was doing earlier on in my career, I worked 12-hour shifts. And I found that in my late 40s and early 50s, 12-hour shifts, even if they were day shifts, 7A to 7P, were just that last hour or two was just a struggle. And I find that 8-hour shifts. Now I graduated from nocturnist work, so usually the latest I work is 10, sometimes 11 o'clock at night. Um, I'm just curious what um, what your thoughts are about 8 versus 12-hour shifts in at least the physician world.
Yeah, I think that I think the shifts should be shorter. The
Hmm.
studies that I mean, I think the CDC had a study. Is it the CDC or the National Institute of Occupational Health? I mean, they've done all the studies how people should work at night in terms of consecutive nights. 8 hours for like you shouldn't do it for more than 4 or 5 days. I mean, we've had studies on all what night shift, but I think it's mostly for nurses. I think most of those recommendations were geared towards the nurses. But I think that yeah, we should review how people work long shifts. I think it's something that um, different healthcare systems or administration should look into, especially if night shift coverage is difficult. I mean, a lot of jobs that you see, I just wrote a post about it. The same job I have seen it being advertised every 6 months because I know that hospital. Every 6 months the job shows up, nocturnist job, looking to hire,
So
and
they're burning through physicians.
so they can recruit, they can retain. So that's just
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it is. So if it's not working, then you have to know that there's something that needs to change.
Because really, residency has changed. When I was a resident in the early 1990s, I was on every third night call, and I was on call overnight, and then I would work sometimes in clinic until and round in the afternoon. And so I'd be up for 36 hours, and then I'd have 12 hours off. I'd come back, work a day, essentially round during the day, whatever, and then I would repeat it every third day. And prior to every third night, it was every other night. So, and then now, because of a law in New York, based upon an unfortunate event that happened with a patient, um, uh, boards and the ACGME have made recommendations for training programs to limit resident hours to, I believe now, 80 hours a week. You cannot work
On that.
doing direct patient care for more than 80 hours a week, which still seems like a tremendous amount. I mean, most workers work 40 to 50 hours a week, but um, it feels like residencies have moved to more shift-based work. And when they schedule residents for evening work, they're scheduled like you were or are, where you work a string of 5 or 7 evenings and then you're off for a couple days and then you transition to day shifts. Um, so it's really interesting. I still think, this is my opinion, I still think we're just scratching the surface and understanding the risks and how to best optimize overnight work because it's not going away. You know, you talked about electricity. 150 years ago, this didn't exist. I mean, there were hospitals, but it was sporadic in how care was given back then. Nurses would be available, but doctors wouldn't be in the hospital at night. And in fact, 150 years ago in the US, 100 years ago, if you were sick, a doctor would come to your house. And so the idea of current state hospitals and what we do and how we manage um, is just very, very different, and it continues to evolve. So,
There's a
yeah,
lot of interest. There's a lot of interest in, circadian health and metabolic health as a whole and chronotypes and because I mean a lot of people will argue that people's chronotypes or people's circadian rhythms may have shifted a little bit, especially with people staying awake much longer. Kids in school stay up all night and people socialize at night, compared to back in the days we used to go to bed once the sun set and it's dusk, that there may be a shift. And does that translate to bad health down the line? I don't know. So, yeah, I was just having that conversation, and because a lot of people know that I'm very passionate about it, so they keep bringing it up. That, yeah, maybe. And some people don't work night shift, but their circadian rhythm may have shifted because they're always awake at night, either scrolling on their phone or socializing at night. And of course, the whole recent studies about light, sleeping with the light on, my husband is like, it's all total darkness, nowadays. There's
same. We have blackout curtains, and I even wear a nightshade just in case, there's
decor,
light open. I'm very, and I have a little fan next to the bed, so I have a little bit of it like white noise sound going. And but last thing I'd like to wrap up with is my recent epiphany over the last 5 or 10 years. I'm very interested in the longevity space because it obviously personally affects me, but it's really very interesting, the evolving science. You talked about it, about movement, and you started using words, and we haven't said the word longevity before, but we all in our careers want to be as productive as
yeah,
possible until we can't be productive. But I think that my biggest epiphany, and I had no awareness about this maybe until a few years ago, and you kind of put it together beautifully, is that diet and sleep and circadian rhythm and exercise, they're all related. They're not separate things. They are all related. Because you had talked about the idea of having a high protein, light something to just fill your stomach a little bit before going to sleep. You don't want to have a whole box of Cheerios
of
with
course.
sugar, spiking your glucose and insulin 3 hours into your sleep, because it's just going to disrupt everything and lean you towards metabolic syndrome. So and it'll wake you up. You have an insulin spike, it'll wake you up, and then you have to go do something when you're up, as opposed to having a high protein snack. In fact, if you're not nocturnist and you're just routinized in the day, I have found, and there's some evidence around this, that finishing your meal 3 to 4 hours before you go to sleep is a good thing. You do not want to go to sleep on a big stomach if at all possible. And I have found having a glass of wine within a few hours of going to sleep, not good for David.
Oh,
And so, everyone's different. Everyone has a different chronotype. But diet and sleep and exercise, and we didn't talk about it, but stress it's all related. Do you agree with that? Does that make sense to you?
yeah, I mean, it does because a lot of people that work nights do complain about a lot of stress, a lot of fatigue,
Yeah.
lack of sleep. Yeah, stress is like the overarching, factor or variable in all this. Stress is how can people minimize stress? How can mindfulness, help with for people to ameliorate their stress? There's just so many behavioral, adaptations that people need in order to thrive. And unfortunately, I think when people talk about their problems, and that's why I'm very kind of big on questionnaires and surveys. What are you dealing with? How can I help you? Because I mean, you can manage what you don't measure. That's just it. If you don't measure it, then you can manage it. So people have to talk about the problems they have, and then physicians have to be aware that if you have somebody who works at night, maybe you need to have more hypervigilance. You have to like pay attention. I have people that tell me that they found out that they developed breast cancer because there's a lot of studies that have shown relationship between women who work night shift and breast cancer, higher risk of breast cancer. So in my coaching program, if you have a family history of it, it's something you need to be aware of. It's something you need to reconsider whether you should work at night. And so these are like I think it's just all about unearthing, just going to the bottom and bringing it to the surface and presenting it to people in ways they can understand risk and so they can make an informed decision. And I don't think that people will ever stop working at night. I don't think. I think, as a matter of fact, as we continue to have a rapidly aging population, people will need to change how they work. A lot of people will need to change how they work because they have to live with, have their parents in their home, or they have to like, find ways to kind of help them navigate, the later years of their lives. So it's really a timely conversation at this time. And of course, sandwich generation, unfortunately, yeah, because I mean, I have a father who's struggling too with, some cognitive issues. So, and I have a sister who had to change her schedule in order to care for him with my mother and somebody who comes in to help. So it's really it's just a timely conversation to give people tools and tips and techniques and that can help them to navigate I mean where they are in life and also offer them alternative solutions if they are not thriving on the night shift. I think there's some people that just can't do it. They just can't find a way around it. They can't, they don't sleep well. They just their diet, everything, their whole system kind of going haywire. And then those people, you identify them and you just, channel them to a different work schedule. And then for people who that feel like their whole body is in sync with it, then you continue to support them and encourage them that the risk is, I mean, it doesn't eliminate the risk, but it's just that you can find better ways and tools that can help you. And then as the research and the science around it continues to evolve, I'm sure we'll have more answers. And it was really exciting, where circadian medicine and metabolic health, the intersection and what the next steps could be. Yeah, I find it very fascinating.
It is fascinating, especially as the science evolves. So, how do folks, as the time of this taping, we have 37,000 subscribers. So, hopefully, there are a few out there that really find this topic very interesting. I do. I've talked about it on with multiple guests that I've had. We've touched on it, but not in the depth that we've provided with your expertise. How does someone get a hold of you to get coached by your expertise?
So I have my website. My website is dryelora.com, Yelora, YELORA.com. And then Dr. Yelora, I have like a night shift hub because pretty much Dr. Yelora is I take care of night shift, not just from metabolic health, which is the obesity part of it, but I talk about resources that help people who work at night too. So from
Awesome.
a consultancy standpoint and how people can thrive, and of course as a nocturnist, I see that there's a lot of hospitals just cannot hire nocturnists. They can hire, they can retain, and so I give tips about that too, and I help hospitalists who are trying to start their first career, or people who are late career nocturnists and are kind of looking for the next step, and they are planning to pivot Yeah, because at some point you just keep asking, what is next for me? Just like you found your calling with, being a podcast host.
Never would have known. Never would have known
Uh,
it.
I know. It's like, what is next? What can what other skills do I have?
It's funny. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I started HUMED because I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I will say that our fields are different. I'm a peds ER doctor, pediatrician. You've been doing hospitalist. You were born in Nigeria. I was born in New York, but I'm really fascinated with the work you do, and I love the fact that you're doing what you're doing because you're taking what you've learned personally on a very personal level, being a young mom with young kids heading into nocturnist work. You've learned about all these things over the last 20 years, and now you're helping other people. You're really helping other people and moving that needle. And I find it beautiful. I find it absolutely beautiful, and such an honor to have you on the show. And I want to have you back. I think we've got to get you back on the show at some point. One of my guests is like, you've got to get your favorites on, and let's do a multi-panel discussion. So maybe we'll have a HUMED conference at some point when I become really big. So we'll see.
Yeah. I'll just tell you. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I have like a fascinating lived experience because I was actually born in Birmingham, in England. So my
Oh,
parents,
wow. Wow.
yeah. So I was actually born in Birmingham. Then my parents went back to Nigeria, and at some point, my father went to the Middle East, and I did some of my training, my internships
Wow.
in the Middle East. The whole Dubai area and all that. So it's kind of like my life has just been in different cultures and environment, and so I kind of see things a little bit not just from a global perspective, and that's why maybe I'm fascinated about night because it's everywhere, and the
Yeah.
night is ubiquitous. It's same night, same sky, everything. And I had asthma as a kid. I had childhood asthma, a lot of nocturnal symptoms. So I don't know if there's a relationship between being up at night with asthma and now being up at night thinking about how I'm going to help my my night shift coaching clients. But it's just it's just been delightful meeting you and having this opportunity to chat with you. And thank you for what you do. Thank
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. For those of you listening, please subscribe on YouTube, where we have a big presence, but also we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So wherever you get your podcast information, hit subscribe and be a part of the human medicine HUMED journey. This is Dr. David Spiro signing off. I hope you all have a great day.
Wonderful.
So.
Thanks for listening to HUMED with David Spiro, MD. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. The video versions are also available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell there so that you never miss a future episode.